broader groups that most people within the sector are familiar with. So you have animal-assisted interventions, animal-assisted activities, and animal-assisted therapies. And they are slightly different to each other. So in an animal-assisted intervention, you have a specially trained dog with a professional handler who works with a human health professional, typically around physical, social, emotional, and cognitive opportunities for motivational, educational, recreational, and or therapeutic benefit. And typically in that scenario, they would be having a baseline and then measuring the outcome. So it is fairly structured in its approach. Similarly, you have animal-assisted therapies, where there's a goal-directed intervention and the dog is an integral part of the treatment, and that is directed or delivered by a health professional. And then you have animal-assisted activities, which is slightly more relaxed. It may not necessarily look at the starting point of the beneficiary and then the outcomes, but in its broadest sense looks at how animal intervention can improve quality of life in different areas, and that can be carried out by either a professional or a volunteer. So most of the work that Pets as Therapy done falls under this animal-assisted activities banner. There is also, in the past few years, shifting slightly in some areas into animal-assisted interventions, which I'll talk about. The challenge that everybody has is the whole environment, the whole sector is completely unregulated. So if in your career, if you go on to be clinicians, and you're working with patients and you think it would be really helpful to have this animal-assisted intervention with your patients, for those clinicians right now who are looking at it, they have no way of measuring the level of training that dog, that person has had. It is completely unregulated. So you could be talking to a patient and they say, well, I've got an emotional support dog. There's nothing that in law that says what that is or what that dog needs to have been taught to enable it to be an emotional support dog. So there is a lot of work happening to professionalise and regulate the industry. And a big driver for that is around bringing consistency and quality, but also then strengthening the welfare of any animals that are involved. So that's a really important piece, and we can come back to that in more detail if it would be helpful. But that just as a broad outline gives you a sense of what animal-assisted activities and interventions look like. But within that broad description, you might kind of be thinking, well, yeah, but what does that look like in reality? And it can be a range of things. So from a Pets as Therapy point of view, we'll move on to that. Pets as Therapy is a not-for-profit organisation. We've been around for 40 years this year, and through a network of currently around 4,000 volunteers, we carry out therapeutic pet visits. Mostly dogs, some cats. And that visit can be anywhere on a spectrum of types of visit. From the simplest model is somebody going to a residential care home and spending some time, normally in a communal living area, sometimes in a person's room, and that's very much about health and well-being, and it's just that interaction in your own time, but that interaction with a dog, and it's that very kind of social side of it, very much looking at that person's emotional well-being. And then you continue along the spectrum into types of visits that may be more structured or more involved. And that could be working with a stroke rehabilitation team. So current thinking around enabling people to recover as successfully as possible from a stroke is about a high volume repetition of certain exercises. For example, if they've lost any kind of mobility around, say, part of their arm, it's the number of repetitions of doing certain exercises that will help that person to regain some of that mobility. For a lot of people, that level of repetition is boring and it's time consuming, and it can be really hard to stay motivated and engaged with X number, and we're talking kind of 6 hours a day ideally, of doing this level of repetitious activity. You bring a dog into the mix, always with the caveat that the person likes dogs to start with. But some of that repetition then becomes about actually you're stroking the dog, or you're trying to undo the clip on their collar, or you might be trying to walk with the dog. Then that level of repetition doesn't feel like I'm repeatedly doing my exercises. It becomes about spending some time with the dog, and that's really good fun. We work in such a wide variety of places. So hospitals, and that could be general wards, intensive care units, stroke rehabilitation, dementia wards, psychiatric intensive care units, huge mix. And again, it will be a mix of these kind of bulk standard, just kind of well-being, interacting with the dog, and we'll talk a little bit about why that helps people, through to something that could be more structured. So that's hospitals. We go to palliative care units, residential care homes, prisons, mainstream schools, special educational needs schools, libraries, mental health centres. So this massive kind of range of places that we go and carry out the visits. Prisons is an interesting one, because sometimes how people perceive, well, why on earth would you take a dog into a prison, and why would it make a difference? And one of the things it helps with is anger management, which can reduce the number of violent outbursts within a prison, which is great for people in the prison and the people that work there. It brings that level of calm. It can also have an impact on reducing the risk of self-harm, easing the symptoms of depression or anxiety or loneliness, which again, it isn't about rewarding somebody for being in prison, it's about creating a safer prison environment, and that's the benefit they bring into that setting. So we're visiting at the moment nearly 5,000 places, and we have a waiting list of around about 3,500 places that want a Pets Therapy visiting team. Each visit typically lasts around about 2 hours, so it's a time limited intervention, and there is a frequency with it, so it could be weekly, fortnightly, monthly, but the one thing we ask of our volunteers is that they're able to make a regular commitment, and that can help because they're building up a level of familiarity and relationship with people. When somebody applies to become a volunteer with us, there's the piece that is around the volunteer applying and making sure that they're the right kind of people to go out and do these kind of visits. And then there's a massive focus on the animal, say normally a dog, that behavioural assessment. And that's incredibly important because we need to know that the dog's able to cope, because we're asking a huge amount of them. And we need to know that they are comfortable interacting with lots of different people, that they can cope with the unpredictability, they can cope with the noise, the different smells, and they're going to have a level of enjoyment out of it, that they're not easily startled and they're not going to be distressed by it. What is so important is that whatever we do is never at their expense. And most animals after any kind of visit are going to be incredibly tired. It takes a huge amount out of them. So during that assessment piece, we look at a level of obedience. What are you doing? Bless you.
Thank you, sorry.
Leave it. Leave it. You can't eat it. Muggles. Come on. Good boy. Leave that. there's a level of obedience, so certain things it's helpful that a dog can do, walk fairly relaxed on a lead, sit when asked, lie down when asked, all those kind of things. But then we spend a lot of time looking at the relationship between the human and the animal, because that's really important. And we look at say their ability to cope with things. So we will make sudden noises. It will always be done in a fairly busy setting. So we see how that dog's coping. And then we talk to the volunteer a lot about preparing your dog for a visit, how to manage them during a visit, how to look out for early signs of stress and discomfort and how to manage it, and then how you help your dog to recover after the visit. One thing we try and explain is that, say for example, you're somebody who wants to take your dog into hospitals. When you're going to the hospital, you know where you're going, you know where you're driving to, you know what the car park looks like. There's a level of expected familiarity in what you're going to see and experience. Your dog gets into the box that moves. It has no concept at the other end of what it's going to see. And dogs are incredibly sensitive to sound and texture and noise and smells and all those kind of things. So we need to prepare them for that kind of environment. One of the things that can startle many dogs when you take them into a clinical setting is the floor and how it feels to their paws. It's a very, very odd texture. Throw into the mix then all the noises and the smells that they encounter. It can be quite traumatic. So we need to make sure we're trying to have dogs that are as bomb-proof as possible and that can cope with anything. Because of you, I can't see my notes.
So are there any like trainings that pet set therapy would kind of let their volunteers go through, especially the pets kind of go through before they visit the place? So
we're bringing more and more in about this, about how you prepare your dog and what is helpful to teach your dog to do, and we recommend certain trainers that we know train in a way that is at the top best practice standards all around positive reinforcement and would recommend people go to those particular trainers to broaden their dog's capability to cope. Sometimes it's really hard to explain to a prospective volunteer that they may want to volunteer but their dog's going to hate it. But also talking through where is right for them to visit. So not every person and not every dog will be great in going to every single environment. So we spend time looking at that. But what I think, or what I hope is more interesting for you is not just the mechanics behind it, but the why. What's the impact? And I was saying to you earlier, I will email you over some links to some academic research. So if anybody does want to read more widely around what the research that's being done into it. So for example, there was a piece of research done, it was published December last year, looking at school children and interventions that can lower their cortisol levels in school. And they had a group that had no intervention, a group that had other interventions, I think it was like playing games or bits and pieces like that, and one group that had pat dogs. And the evidence, so they took swabs from the children to measure the cortisol levels, and what the results showed was the greatest reduction in the cortisol level was the group that interacted with the pat dog against all of the others. There's a whole different debate about why children are at school and their stress levels are going up so high. I mean, that's just dreadful to think what's going on. But the interesting thing was the impact on the cortisol level, and that was both in mainstream schools and special educational needs schools. So Sam, I will ping you some of those links that you can then share if anybody's interested. The impact piece is fascinating because on the face of it, you're probably sat there thinking, well, this is the most ridiculously simple model in the world, and it's all very nice, but you know, what does it do? And it is a ridiculously simple model, and we're very honest about, well, we're not fixing anything, but the impact it can have can be astronomical. And we've got a lot of anecdotal stories and case studies of things that have happened as a result of a pack dog being there. For example, a lady in and this has happened more than once, but a lady in a residential care home hadn't spoken for 4 months and was living with dementia. And you quite often find with people living with dementia, they do withdraw and lose confidence and interest in being able to communicate within a group of people. And the first time she spoke was when a pack dog came in and was able to talk about the dogs that she had. And suddenly there was a way that the person could be a part of the community that she was living in again, that she hadn't got when the pack dog wasn't there. So it didn't fix her dementia. We're very honest about that, but it did mean when the pack dog was going in to visit, she was having a better quality of life than when she was living in her room on her own and choosing not to participate. There's a preschool that one of our volunteers goes to for children with special educational needs, and there was a little girl there, I think she's around about 3 years old, and it was thought that her level of cognitive ability was always going to be very low, that she was never going to be able to speak, and I think it was about 3 visits in, the little girl said the name of the dog, and again she'd never verbalised a clear word prior to that. But the piece that was really interesting is that she made the connection that the dog might like a ball to play with, and went and got a ball and came back. And that was a level of cognitive reasoning that nobody up till that point had seen. So there's something about the catalyst that the dog sort of is in these settings. Morgan and I had a visit where we were in a A&E department, and a lady had been brought in during a really severe mental health episode, and she'd been in the department for around about, I think it was about 2 hours, and the consultant on duty asked if we'd go into the side room to see her, and because the one thing they thought was that she liked dogs, and she hadn't really spoken while she'd been in hospital. And we went into the room, and the lady was on the bed and fully covered, all the blankets up really tight around her, and the health professional, the clinician, was sat sort of at the end of her bed with I always remember they had like a notebook, a clipboard, and when we walked in, generally Morgan's lead is fairly relaxed, so he can choose to step in or not, and he stepped in sort of towards her bed, and she just held his head and started to cry, and also started to talk, and she started talking about what had triggered the episode. Leave. That was helpful. What had triggered the episode, what she'd used to harm herself, a whole load of information that clinician hadn't been able to encourage her to share up till that point. So again, we didn't fix anything. But what we did provide somehow was a window of opportunity for that health professional to hear what was happening, and then obviously start trying to help based on what that lady had said. So there is something about this simplicity of providing or having animals within a therapeutic setting that on the face of it you're like, that's just lovely, but then actually the impact that can happen.
I wonder, like, if there are any theories on like the kind of exact like mechanisms on what kind of like emotional effect having like a pet in a therapeutic setting kind of brings. Is it like it offers like more of a sense of community, or like you have kind of, or does it create like maybe a more informal setting that makes someone relaxes a bit more?
So there is some research out there. There's a fair amount of research out there. What unfortunately a lot of the research doesn't do is look at the before and after. And one of the conversations we're having with 3 universities is being able to do some research that looks at that person before there's an animal assisted intervention and then after, so you've got a better chance of understanding the impact and really starting to unpick the why. And there's lots of thoughts around what happens. There's a lot of research that looks at the way a human being relaxes when they're stroking an animal, and what happens to them physically, which you will understand far better than me. I think also what we don't always think about is when we're thinking about why does it have an impact, why does it work? I mean, there's the one piece which is dogs particularly come to you with no judgment. They accept you as you are in that moment and how you respond to them. And I think for a lot of people that's very comforting. They don't come with the internal dialogue and the emotional baggage that most of us have when we go into a setting. You know, like when I was coming here today, it's like, I wonder what the room's like, what kind of people, or what if I forget this bit to say that bit. You know, we have an internal dialogue. Dogs don't. They're very much in the moment, and I think that's a massive contributory factor. And when we watch, so we've got a programme where children can read to dogs, particularly children who are struggling with literacy, which on the face of it sounds bonkers. Like, why would you do that? But some of the comments we get back from the children is, well, the dog doesn't laugh when I get it wrong, and the dog doesn't correct me. So I think there is that piece there about no judgment. The other thing with domesticated dogs, which is like we all live with, they have learned exceptionally well how to read human emotion and human facial expressions and tend to respond to them. So I think you've got kind of those two things in parallel. You've got a living being that isn't judging you, but is also very good at reading you on the whole. And there have been experiments looking at how dogs respond to human facial expressions. It's just a thing. Just go and see whatever it is.
What is it?
So would you say it's the lack of prejudice is what comforts someone in a sense?
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, there's that whole piece just about come sit down. I think that is a part of it. I mean, there's that whole sense of just a warm being next to you that can be calming, but I think there is that piece of there's just no prejudice with it. You know, when we're with people with stroke rehabilitation, there are people who may be feeling embarrassed by what they can no longer do, let alone the boredom that comes with it, but the frustration and the embarrassment of what they can no longer do, and maybe they can't speak as clearly as they did. Well, that interaction with a dog doesn't have any thought on that. It's just enjoying that interaction with that person, and I think that takes a part away from it. And I think when we're talking about dogs maybe more in clinical settings, for those people that like dogs, it's a very relaxing thing to have in a clinical setting, and it's really interesting when we hear feedback from clinicians around the difference it makes to the interactions they have with their patients. We've got some, we work very closely with a residential addiction treatment centre in Wales. And again, we're trying to look at how we could be a little bit more thorough in understanding the impact rather than sort of anecdotally seeing it. But one of the things people do see is that the clients at the centre are more likely to turn up to their sessions if there's a pat dog in the room. And on the face of it, you're like, well, there's no other difference to what's going to happen in that session at all. So why is having a four-legged fluffy thing in the room, big, small, whatever, why is that a pull? What is it about that interaction that they're having? We don't fully understand it, that makes that person who's probably at one of the hardest points in their lives in trying to recover from addiction, something in their head goes, I will choose to go to my session today because there's a dog there. But on another day they wouldn't. It's odd. Well, it's not odd, I find it interesting. What's the trigger for that choice?
Can I make a guess?
Yeah, go for it.
I think maybe it's because like when you're in those groups that are more like marginalized and isolated from society, it's a lot harder to come into contact with like a nice friendly dog. Like maybe you see a stray, but you don't know if they have like
Yeah.
a disease or can't be trusted.
Yeah.
But like a pet dog is more like in a environment that is safe and like controlled in a sense. So you can like pet them and like talk to them and spend time with them without having the fear of like, can this dog be trusted? Because in that isolated group as well, you might not like know someone who has a pet either. So it's a lot harder to come by.
Yeah.
In those cases.
Absolutely. I think that you're probably right. There's probably a part of it there, and the extent to which. Let's start.
Sorry.
It's fine.
I'll go check out.
The kind of and also I think you've hit something quite interesting there, particularly with that group of being a group that are fairly isolated from wider society.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of interactions they don't get. And actually, does that mean the majority of their interactions are only with clinical experts of varying types?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the fact that it's someone who's something that isn't a doctor or a specialist or a counsellor or
Yeah.
don't know.
Like not someone who's trying to like constantly help you.
Again, it's that acceptance. They will just accept you as you are, without judgment.
I think that's quite inspiring as well, like even for just normal like clinical therapeutic settings, because like I feel like that kind of shows that we've got quite a bit to learn from like pet dogs as well, because perhaps something about like the therapeutic settings that we have currently kind of it includes quite a bit of like judgment, and like there's that sense of like, you know, pathologizing like certain behaviors, and like it's the patient is seen as a like, oh, they're sick, they need to be treated.
Yeah.
Whereas like a dog goes in, it's more just about like, okay, let's spend some time together and let's both be happy.
Yeah. You're all right, you. Come on. Oh my God. I think that's a really interesting observation, because dogs are driven by being happy, and often their behaviours are driven by trying to make you happy, because they know that if you're happier, you will feel better. What I find really interesting, thinking about again the clinical setting, as you say, where as a clinical professional, your starting point is trying to help that person, trying to fix them, and not intentionally, but labelling them as you've got this thing, and then we're going to work with you to try and fix it, and you don't get that from a dog. What I find interesting is the situations, both with children, young people and adults, where the dog being brought into the setting is the catalyst for that person opening up where they haven't done before. I mean, from a treatment point of view, that often gives greater insight into what that person is feeling or thinking or whatever, but I find it fascinating and would love to understand what is it about that bringing that animal into the setting that is the catalyst for that person. I mean, we go into eating disorder clinics, secure mental health units, and the feedback we often get from the professionals who are working with patients and clients is that they get more from those sessions in that engagement from the patient than they often do from any other. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Could it be like innocence? Maybe the dog isn't motivated like financially to help out, or like isn't getting paid to do this, it's just here.
I think that's a really interesting observation, that there's no motivation there. There's no motivation, whereas a health professional, as a psychologist or a psychiatrist or whatever it is, your motivation is, I'm guessing, is to understand that person's behaviour and why they've got whatever it is that you're trying to treat, but also then what the treatment pathway looks like and how you enable that person to recover and move on.
Yeah.
A dog doesn't have that dialogue in their head.
Yeah.
They don't know that person has bipolar or schizophrenia. Actually, it's not called that anymore, is it? Multiple personality disorder, or that they've got scars from self-harm, or whatever it is, that maybe that is a part of it. But I think when you're looking at how animals can help in a clinical setting, I think there is a wealth of opportunity. I think it's always good to just keep in your mind at the moment, if you choose to go and learn more about it, is this kind of elephant in the room that it is utterly unregulated, and there's nothing that sets out what you should and shouldn't do and how you should train a dog to do these different kind of things.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense? I've
Yeah.
just sort of
It does.
gone at you.
No,
for
no.
half
It's
an hour or
really
so.
interesting. I just wonder, like, because you did mention that a dog's motivation is mainly to kind of make you happy and for themselves to be happy as well. So when they go into like therapeutic settings where, like, if like their presence kind of makes a patient open up, as you said, like one of the patients just started crying and talking about her experiences, would that be like confusing and distressing to the dog usually?
Doesn't seem to be. It is incredible when you've got a well socialized, well balanced dog, how good they are at reacting to human emotion in the right way. And so if you saw my two, Jamie is same breed as Morgan, similar size. If you saw them when I come home, they are bonkers. They bounce up and down. They just, and you would look at them and go, there's not a chance they would be any kind of therapy dog. Look at the state of them. They're utter chaos. But you walk into a residential home or a school or whatever it is, they moderate their behaviour. That's the bit I find incredibly interesting. That the behaviours that they will happily display at home sometimes drive me insane. You don't see the kind of the pawing, the jumping up, none of that. And I haven't taught that, though I do observe it in them, and it does fascinate me as to why are you making a conscious choice not to do those things, whereas in another setting you will.
In a way, it's kind of like manners, and like politeness to like strangers.
Sometimes, somehow they know that it's not appropriate to do that.
That's interesting.
It is interesting, you know, when they lean into somebody on a visit, or with that lady went, and I'm not sure Morgs is overly fussed on someone cradling his head in their hands, but somehow there's something in them that goes, actually right now that's what's happening, and it's fine. You're right there. You can't be comfy. I can't see anybody now. Good boy. So yeah. Any other questions? I'm happy to take questions or thoughts or observations.
Do you think Morgan responds that way because maybe Morgan's aware of the duty he has, or do you think it's some other thing going on?
I don't know. I don't know if they see a sense of duty. Dogs are incredibly uncomplicated. And as much as they give us a huge amount, they're also very self-serving. They repeat behaviours that get a really good outcome for them. But they are we're having a chat. They are driven by pleasure. So I don't know if they see it as a sense of duty, or they're just occasionally more intuitive to our emotion, and kind of make a decision on, actually I don't think that's going to be a right way to behave, so I'm going to do this. Because when you watch dogs interact with other dogs, dogs are very, very effective communicators. In many respects, far more effective than we are as human beings, because they watch far more carefully. And they kind of communicate in, what I often call kind of little tiny whispers.
Mhm.
So if you watch two dogs, two happy, well balanced, well socialised dogs off lead.
Oh.
You're not going off lead, matey. Come here.
Okay.
Bubbles. I know it's always very exciting. If you watch them meeting each other, they won't come head on. They typically,
Those are the pens, Morgan.
the cycling isn't exciting. They'll typically come at each other in an arc. And when they're kind of coming at each other like that, they'll be looking at that dog from nose to tail in how it's moving, what it's doing, and there's almost like a whole little conversation. Good boy. A whole little conversation of working out whether each dog wants to come and say hello to the other one.
Yeah.
And it could be the turn of the head, the move of an ear, the way their tail's positioned, physically how they're moving, the level of relaxedness or stiffness in their body. Nice little stress yawn there, thank you, Schmoggles. But there's a whole wealth of information that they are giving and receiving to each other that we as humans aren't always very good at seeing in them when they're trying to communicate to us. But it also means they apply those same skills when they're looking at us. So they do notice things that probably we don't see in other people, which again I find really interesting. So for example, then with him, he had a little sniff about. Sniffing is really relaxing for dogs. He did a shake. Again, that's a dog kind of going, oh, just trying to relax myself. And that wasn't a sleepy yawn, that was a stress yawn or a boredom yawn. And you can just tell because it's slightly more tight and clenched here. So it's a whole little package of communication there just to go, oh, I want to do something else now. But you can have a little bit of patience, pup. But they are very, very adept at communicating. And again, also, as I said, driven by what has the best outcome for them.
So I guess like it also takes quite a bit from like the volunteers, like the owners kind of like part to kind of understand like how the dog is feeling, how their well-being.
So we're bringing in a lot more information now about what to look out for in your dog. So not just about preparing them for the visit, but also then what to look out for during a visit, and then what to do when you see these certain things. Thankfully, touch wood, not quite wood, but we have very, very, very few incidents. But of the ones that we do have, I would say probably 95% of them are avoidable had the volunteer spotted those communication signals in their dog more quickly, or those signs in their dog more quickly. Dogs will try their utmost to tell you something's wrong before they get to the point even that they growl. They will have tried a whole wealth of things, from turning their head away, physically moving their body away. They might put their paw up, they might do a stress yawn. There's all these, and I won't bore you with all of it, but all of these things that they will try before they get to a growl, which is a warning shot of I'm really not happy. And it will get to that point when all the other things they've tried have been ignored. So we do work hard and are increasingly trying to do more with our volunteers about understanding these kind of behaviours that dogs display. About not just during pet visits, but in general, it makes them, a better pet owner by having that level of understanding.
I guess that also adds into why it's quite hard to have like a qualification or like certification of like whether a volunteer or a pet is qualified as like a therapy pet or like therapy pet volunteer, because it's like kind of the relationship of it, isn't it? So it's very hard to quantify.
It is hard to quantify, and even if you're able to quantify it, then there's a next piece, which is the frequency at which you should or shouldn't reassess. How long a time lag should you leave it? A lot can happen in a dog's life, and it can adjust their behaviour. And actually, particularly like Morgan, he's 9 years old now. As he gets older, I have to be mindful of him getting older, and if he developed arthritis, well, I wouldn't want to take him somewhere where you're not climbing on the chair, where he's going to be in pain or discomfort. So yeah, it is difficult, you're right, to put this kind of regulatory framework in.
Yeah.
But there's also that, talking to a number of professionals, there's a piece of work happening in Parliament at the moment about why there's been an increase in dog bites on humans and what can be done to reduce them. So we were talking a lot about humans and dogs and how humans understand dogs and why dogs bite and all this kind of thing. And we're talking about regulation and that there's a huge amount of interest in dogs being used in therapeutic settings or being emotional support dogs or whatever it is. But going into it blindly, if you really don't understand dog behaviour, what kind of risks you're taking, because it isn't for every dog, and they don't have a limitless pot of emotional resilience to keep giving and giving. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say one thing is I think it's interesting what their like the dog's motivation is, because so I study psychology and most of the time it's kind of just reduced to either food or like not being punished or hurt or something. But the therapy dogs don't get either, so it's very interesting. Like they just have something, I don't know, like a willingness to just help.
There is a
Very
willingness.
interesting.
So to an extent, food is one of the big motivators, but play is a big motivator as well.
Yeah.
So Morgan, not appropriate at a pet visit, but Morgan loves to play with a tug toy, like a proper pull. Whereas our other pointer loves a retrieve game and would sometimes pick the game over the food. So understanding what motivates your dog can be really, really helpful, and what they're driven to do. And we were talking about this just when I arrived, that different, dog breeds are designed to do specific things, and that also is what motivates them. So with both of ours, scent games are really interesting because they're part of the gun dog group, and part of what they were designed to do was to track things. So scent games is again a motivator. It could be that there's a level of selflessness in a visit, or that because dogs are very good at reading human emotion, they think they can make a difference, or just make someone feel better. But often with a lot of volunteers, and rightfully so, they spend a lot of time after the visit doing things that the dog likes to build up this kind of, we call it a bucket of emotional resilience. And during a visit, you kind of pretty much empty the bucket and you want to fill it back up so they're able to cope with stuff. So dogs also make those connections that if this happens, that happens. So there's also again that kind of bit of motivation that if I do this, afterwards I get to do whatever it is. So with him, sniffing, running, sleeping in that order, and he's a happy pup after a visit. So they do build patterns and connections. So it could be that that's a part of it as well. They know if they go through the right, fine, it's hot and the floor's weird and everything smells peculiar.
I guess it's like with police dogs as well. They get given a ball or something afterwards after they sniff something out.
Yeah. It is absolutely, you're teaching a dog to make the choices you want them to make, and they'll make that choice because there's a reward. So I was persuaded a few years ago by Morgan's breeder to show him. If you've watched dog shows or ever seen anything, so kind of Crufts on telly, not my bag. I look like an idiot walking around the ring. But I did say I would do it, and I made a commitment. And I thought, actually, let's make it interesting. So it's a very nerdy, crazy world. But one of the things people spend a huge amount of time doing is getting their dog to stand in the position for however their breed should stand and make them look at their best. And I thought, well, I don't want to play, because they'll put a hand on and they'll move their back leg or their tail or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's not for me. So I thought I'd do it with clicker training. And the joy with clicker training is you can really get into the precision of what's happening. So you build it up and build it up and build it up to the point that he only got the click when all 4 paws were exactly where they needed to be. But all the way through, he's making the choice as to whether he wants to play the game or not. And if he didn't, we stopped. So yeah, you are teaching choices, and then you're absolutely right. It comes down to what the reward is at the end, be it a game or a food. You're quite foodie, aren't you? But the other thing on visits is, no matter how hard you try, particularly in residential care homes, older people are a nightmare for hiding biscuits.
Oh yeah.
Sly custard cream. You know, I did that crop. And it's
Can't help it.
gone before, it's gone in the dog's mouth before you know it. And they just think it's the best thing ever, and you're like, okay.
Can Morgan have custard creams?
Technically no, but he has had custard creams.
Oh,
I mean, let's be honest, much like with children, there is an impact when you give them pure sugar, isn't there?
Going back to the motivation though, so we don't know whether there's a degree of altruism, correct? Like, it's still like up for debate?
Yeah, I think so, very much so. Because there's that level of, thank you, there is that level of simplicity in dogs, but at the same time there is this level of emotional intuition which is really interesting. And dogs can make choices. So it's what is that? Because to be honest, you could get to a hospital and he could just put his paws out and go, I don't want to go in. And once they've done it a few times, they know what to expect. So it's really interesting why. Particularly therapeutic visits, very different to an assistance dog, which is, you know, they're trained intently to repeat certain behaviours and do certain things. What are you sniffing? What are you doing? What are you doing? There's nothing happening. Just stand there and look pretty. No.
No.
No. You're being chatty. Come here.
Does he want to go outside?
Oh, he's just being a diva.
If he's bored, one of us might pat him to give him stimuli. Change it up.
You can come and say hello. What's happening?
Morgan's a bit bored, isn't he?
Just up for today. I'm so sorry about the turnout.
No, don't worry.
Yeah.
As long as the 3 of you found some parts of it interesting,
It's
that's
really
good.
Morgan, no.
Leave.
No.
So
Oh,
nasty
these smells he's sniffing
that
out.
is my dog. My dog. That
give him a
is
little
my
pull.
bag.
Morgan.
Ooh.
Oh, good puppy. Sit. Thank you. There you go. There.
See, that's a bit of food motivation.
Exactly. But it's more interesting if you make a game out of it,
Yeah.
isn't it? Or you have to do something. You don't just demand food. What are you going to do? You're going to do all your tricks now. You
What
sit.
tricks does Morgan have?
Oh, a huge number. Can you just sit for me? Sit. Good lord. Wait. Morgan Davis. Impatient pup. There's also research, when you said about food motivation, there's a piece of research done about the hierarchy, so the value of the food that you will use.
Yeah.
And dogs will work harder for good finger, for higher value treats.
Because there's also the whole anticipation part of it, isn't it? If they anticipate it more, it's like it's higher value.
Absolutely, and what it is, so if you're using just dry kibble, which is what they would normally have as big part of their food, and the dog next to them, and I've seen this in a training class, and the dog next to them is touch. The dog next to them has got chicken. You can see that dog go, and they will disengage.
Yeah.
Bit like with people, you know, you're doing a job and you'll get given £1 coin, or like someone else has been like £50 note. The chances are you'd sit there and go, but so there is that food motivation, but there's a hierarchy in the food motivation. Down.
Is like the higher tier food like typically kept only for like special occasions? Is it to maintain the hierarchy, or is it also like it's more unhealthy, like in humans?
Bit of both. You tend to use, you tend to keep a few that are really high value. So the one in my pocket is a particularly high value one, which can be very handy, but in some settings not, because he'll drool because he's so motivated by it. But things like cheese, chicken, those kind of things, really, really high value, and you would reduce the impact if you gave it too much. But also there is a health element there. It's not great to give your dog a massive cheese. Yeah, I know you know that word.
Cheese. Oh.
Yeah. There are the other bit that's quite surprising is how many words a dog can learn. And how many words you end up spelling, and then they realise the pattern of what the spelling is, so you then have to come up with another word.
It's interesting. My mum works with dogs, and we'd always have to spell out the word. I won't say it, like WALK.
Oh, you can use.
But then they
walk,
knew it
that's fine.
after a while, and they would go crazy at that.
Yeah.
And it was it's just they're very smart animals.
Oh, they are ridiculously smart. Hand signals. Yeah, they are the things you can teach are incredible. So one thing, again, it's a slightly bonkers one, it sounds on the face of it, but really useful in a therapy setting, or can be, but also for just a dog in general, is you can teach a dog to recognise the name of different parts of its body. And you know, well, why apart from it being did you catch it?
No.
Apart from being sometimes it does pretty quick. You're like, well, why would you do that? It's really helpful in the vets. If the vet says to you, I'm just going to look in your dog's ear, you're like, okay, you know what's going to happen. And the dog suddenly has a hand here, and you're like, whoa, the dog recognises ear means a hand's going to do that. That's really helpful. But also in a therapy setting, you can say to a child, would you like to stroke the dog's ear? And the dog has an idea of what's coming. And it just helps to keep things more relaxed. Or you can make a bit of a game with it with the children. So it is really handy. Yeah, you're only limited by what you need to figure out to teach a dog and how to teach it. They are very smart. And equally stupid. Yeah.
But it's the right amount of balance though. Like they're intuitive in some ways, but at the same time they're not judgmental in a sense. Yeah.
I mean, he's learned how to open a door,
Wow.
which is really smart, but equally rolled off the sofa the other day. So, you know, there's a level where you're like,
choose.
you're supposed to be quite bright, but that's not where.
Maybe just like a child, maybe just like
Yeah.
a very young child.
Yeah. So a good kind of comparison is typically a dog's cognitive ability is similar to a toddler. So it's a 3-4-year-old.
Oh, I recall you mentioned that there are a few like therapy cats as well.
We have pack cats.
Are they harder to train? Because I feel like dogs are a bit more in tune with like human emotions and all that.
Definitely.
While cats are kind of.
So I think it's the same with cats as it is with wolves. So when people kind of, although it's long ago been disproven, but still trying to associate dogs with wolves, the distance is way gone past that. One of the distinct difference, and I think cats fall into the same category as wolves do, is wolves have not evolved to read or be interested in human emotions. The wolf has no interest at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think cats are the same, whereas dogs have, as they've evolved, gone, it's quite handy to read a human emotion, because typically I know then how to get food. That's where it came from. Muggles! Whatever it is that's down there, come here. Thank you. Make a different choice. No, you're not going that way. There we go. So yeah, and I think that's partly why cats are more difficult. They are less people driven. Have you dribbled everywhere, pup?
I think there's a bit of like crumbs. Sorry about that.
It was me. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so they are more difficult. But you typically, I'm not great with cat breeds. Is it a ragdoll?
Yeah.
That are more human-y.
Yeah, I have a ragdoll, and in some cases he acts a bit like a dog.
Yeah.
Like when we call him over, because I have 2 other cats.
Yeah.
The 2 other cats, they know you're calling them, but they just won't respond.
Choose not to.
Yeah, but my ragdoll would come over.
Yeah.
And expect like head pats after that.
Yeah.
Wait, Sam, which one is this?
Timmy.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think ragdolls certainly are more common. And cats that are, and again, I know far more about dogs, but cats that are shown in cat shows, I think because they're just far more used to being handled by humans and being transported and put on little cat harnesses and leads and whatnot. So yeah, far more difficult.
So I guess like they're just commonly more pack dogs.
Yeah.
Than pack pets.
They are typically more. So what does your mum work? She works.
Oh, she just does like dog walking, dog sitting and stuff, and she wants to get into like dog training, I think. But it's funny you mentioned the dog shows, because we used to be really into that, but we had like rescue dogs and they were crossbreeds.
Yeah.
It was Collie Cross Bernese Mountain Dogs.
Oh wow, that's a mix.
But we ended up going to London in scruffs. So
Scruffs competition,
but so crossbreed crufts,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it is. But we didn't win that. But we got to London, and I don't know how.
Wow.
Yeah, so we did a lot of dog shows when I was younger, like kind of informal ones.
Fiercely competitive.
Yeah,
Even
they
the
get-
informal ones. Bonkers.
Yeah, people get a bit funny, and I'm like,
Oh,
calm
yeah.
down.
Oh yeah, people get a bit funny.
No, it's fun. So I've had been surrounded by dogs for a lot of my childhood and stuff. But yeah, no, they're just they're brilliant. I love
They are
dogs.
brilliant.
They are.
They are absolutely brilliant, and
All they do is just love you, and that's
they do.
that's it, really.
And also for me as well, they're a great source of exercise.
Mm.
One of
Yeah,
the
I know.
reasons we ended up with pointers is their need for exercise.
Oh.
Now you'll still do 10 miles, won't you?
That really is true though. Dogs need to like keep going and going.
Yeah. And then you get home and they're complete sofa loafers.
Are there like certain breeds of dogs that you guys would look out for as well? Like since there are certain cat breeds that seem to
No, with dogs I think it's different. I think with dogs it's all about temperament, personality, behaviour, general, well socialised, well balanced dogs, and any breed or mix of breeds can be. You have certain breeds that probably don't have as strong a drive to be a really great pack dog as others, but we have everything from a Chihuahua through to a Great Dane and a Akita and just everything. It is, it is how you've brought that dog up and what it's been exposed to and what it's comfortable with. So we certainly don't start by what breed the dog is. We look at the behaviour of the dog.
I see. Yeah.
Right then.
No.
Was that okay?
Yeah, that was
Good.
great. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
It's so interesting to learn.
So yeah, I'll send you the
Yeah.
research links that you can share with people if they're interested. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank
Pleasure.
you for coming.
it's all right.
Very informative.
Yeah.
Like I learned so much like about dogs, to be honest, that I didn't know.
I know there's a crazy world out there. Yeah, it's been really good fun. It's far better than doing what I was should have been doing, or not should have been doing, but could have been doing, which was writing our annual report. That's really
Oh.
dull. It's way more interesting.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.